guys, so today I'm gonna do a video that's a bit of a redo with some additions to one of my old videos that I did in French anyway, so you know, for you guys it's probably a new video. So you know that I've been really busy lately, and that's been, I mean, that's the main reason why, sorry, I'm really tired by the way, that's the main reason why I'm sick too. It's the main reason why I haven't been uploading as many videos as I used to, and I'm really sorry about that, but most of you know that I'm really busy between my work, which is very time consuming and exhausting, and I'm preparing for an exam, which is a competitive exam in France that you have to go through if you want to be a teacher. And this specific exam is really difficult in literature. You have to know Latin, you have to know a foreign language, you have to know grammar, you have to know you know, all about the style, which this one is kind of more linked to literature in my opinion, and you also have a comparative literature test, and you have a French literature test. I haven't been able to read as I would have liked to. You know, there are billions of books that I want to read, and I always love to, you know, expand my horizon and read different things, and there are a few books that I'm really craving right now. I would just love to be able to sit down and read them for the pleasure and just for the sake of reading. But basically what I've been doing this past months, I've just been reading and reading and reading over and over again the same books, and also I've been reading a lot of articles, I've been reading a lot of, you know, analysis and critical analysis and literary history books. So I'm not going to talk about this because I don't think they're really interesting for you. I'm going to talk about the fiction book that I've been reading. The first book I'm going to talk about is this one. It's called Le Lys dans la vallée, and it was written by Balzac. So this one is not a book that I'm going to be tested on, but it is a book that I haven't read before because I don't like Balzac very much, and it's a book that has some similarities with one of the books that I'm going to be having my test on, possibly, because you have like in French literature you have I think 7 books and you don't know which one you're going to be having the test on. So I thought I would give it a go. I am only a few pages in and I already don't like it. I don't know what it is about Balzac, because he's one of the most famous French writers. A lot of people like him, and he has a very extensive you know, amount of books that he has written, and yeah, none of the books that I've read by him I have liked. I don't know what it is. I feel like the writing style for me is kind of dry and I can't really get into it. It feels very much like a very impersonal, sort of dry, distant, artificial sort of book. So the next 2 books I want to talk about are by a Portuguese writer. I'm sorry, I'm really sick and it's really hard for me to talk. It's called Lobo Antunes. I don't know if that's the correct way to pronounce it. For any lovely person from Portugal, correct me. I have to say that before preparing this exam I had never heard of him. Actually, the only Portuguese writer that I know is Pessoa, so yeah, I'm a bit ignorant when it comes to Spanish and when it comes to Portuguese literature, so if you have recommendations for after the exam, let me know. And he's very well known in Portugal. He's one of the most well-known authors, even though his work is not controversial in a way that, you know, the public reacted badly to it, but it's controversial because it deals with heavy subjects such as war, colonization, identity, violence. This one, Le Cul de Judas, is the one that I have to study for the exam. This one, Mémoire d'éléphant, is the one that I have decided to pick up and read just to have a better idea of what his general writing is like. I have to say I'm not a big fan of the... like I said in my previous video in French about this one, because I hadn't read this one at that time, it's not books that I enjoy, it's not books that I would really like to read, and it's not books that I would read again on my own, you know, just for my own pleasure. But I have to admit that those are brilliant books in the way they are written, in the way you are guided through the book, in the way he brings multiple themes and makes them kind of echo with one another. I think in that way it's very interesting. The style, even though it's a translation, so obviously you always have to take it with a bit of distance, is very interesting, and it really occurs once again very well with the themes. The style and the themes really answer each other in a way that makes it even more compelling and even more strong, even stronger. It is hard to read. This one at least is very hard to read because there is no sort of humor in that one. I felt like this one is a bit more humorous, so it's kind of easier to get through it, but this one is really hard. It is depicted without any sort of like screen or without any sort of protection, if that makes any sense. You are completely given the facts without any, you know, sugarcoating or anything like that. So I would suggest reading them because I feel like those are books that we should read, not only for the content but also for the writing style, which is an experience in itself, but those are not books that I particularly enjoy myself. The next one is L'usage du monde by Nicolas Bouvier. Nicolas Bouvier is a Swiss writer who wrote in French, and this is a travel story, a travel book. It is on the exam list, and it's very surprising to me because as much as I do enjoy the traveling aspect of this, because I love traveling and it goes in countries that I am interested in, like Pakistan, Iran, the east of Europe, it's kind of, what would I say? The literary quality of it I don't think is very high, and it's very different from the quality of the other books on the list, in my opinion, my humble opinion. So this is one book that I would recommend if you like literary travel books that are a bit higher than, for example, let's say Wild, which is, I mean, the literary quality of Wild in my opinion is very poor, but it's also not the greatest book of all time. Next one is gonna be very famous for the English-speaking people out there. It's Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I did really enjoy the book. I like the writing, I like the style, I like the story, I like how I like how open it is to interpretations and analysis. You can, you know, there are so many symbols and so many different things you could say about these books. It's, you know, the one thing that I really like is when you open a book and it's so deep that you could go on for, I don't know, weeks and months and years even studying it and analyzing it and having theories about it. And I really enjoyed reading the book, even though it's obviously a very dark story of colonization, of brutality, of the question of humanness and the limits of being human and what you discover when you try to go beyond these limits. A French book, L'Acacia by Claude Simon. My voice is like disappearing, it's really hard. This one is a book that you need to read multiple times. So when I first started reading the book, I was like, fuck, I hate the book. It's a book about the Second World War and the First World War. It's about history, it's about family. It's very difficult to follow through because everything is intertwined and everything is very confusing on purpose. So you have to read it several times with a pencil and possibly a notebook next to you. And it's really hard to get into because the sentences are very long. Everything is like very confusing in this book. Not only the vocabulary, but the storyline and the style and also the way it's organized between chapters, and the chronology is not very logical. But it's, after I finished reading the book, I was like, oh, that's actually a great book. It's so, for me, it's one of the best things when you start reading a book and you're like, I'm not into it. And then when it's over, you feel like, oh my god, that's already over. That was actually really nice. And I think that's how I feel about this book. It's not something I would pick up again on my own. But it's definitely a great book. Kind of like in a similar way with Lobo Antunes. I think, you know, there are times where you meet books and you just have to be like, okay, that's a great piece of art, that's a great piece of work. Even though it does not necessarily touch you or move you like your favorite books would do. Those are more like books that you have respect for. This one though touched me and moved me a little bit. It has moments which are very strong emotionally speaking. So I don't know if it's translated. I actually think it's translated because it has won the Nobel Prize. So yeah, but if you have never read anything by him, or if you're interested in history and if you like books which are a bit complex in their structure, I would highly recommend. I'm pretty sure you're gonna like it very much. Then we are hopping onto the 18th century with the poetry of André Chénier. Oh my fucking god, that's one of the hardest books I've ever had to read, I think. I mean, maybe not, but kind of. It is a poetry collection written by André Chénier, who was a poet, a writer, and a journalist sort of in the 18th century during the Revolution. So basically you have a mixture of love poems, of political poems, or poems about art and creating art and writing and what does it mean and how to write and all these things. It is very, very, very classical, even though you have modern bits and pieces and modern touches to the writing and how poetry is made, but generally speaking it's very classical and very inspired by ancient Greece. So it's full of references, full of comparisons, full of reinterpretations and uses of, you know, ancient tales and myths and stuff like that. So you need a rather big culture to get through the book, and that's why it's very demanding and very difficult in my opinion. Also the vocabulary and also the way you study it is you really have to take in consideration how, you know, the verses and how the melody and the rhythm and everything, and that's not something I like very much. I like poetry, but not that kind of poetry. What saves the book for me is the genius of André Chénier. Even though I'm not a big fan of that kind of poetry, I have to admit it's wonderful. The intensity and the faith that he has in art, it's brilliant and wonderful. I would really suggest you read a bit about him. He was sentenced to death after the revolution because he was not really following what the revolutionaries at the time really wanted or aspired for. Yeah, it was just a great man, I think. I mean, in some ways it was a great man, like, you know, just following your brain and following your heart, because they're both the same, you know, following your inner direction and your inner faith in art to the point of dying, I think is just wonderful. I mean, wonderful, it's just admirable, really. I don't know if anyone, or, you know, watching that video or even myself could do it, so I have a real respect for that. Oh my god, my favorite of all time, L'éducation sentimentale by Flaubert. I have talked about this book in so many videos. I have talked about Flaubert in so many videos. So I've read this one again and again and again. I'm gonna reread it again. I love this book so much. It's my favorite book of all time. I've said it before. It's brilliant. It's a story that's, in my opinion, impossible to define. It's a love story. It's about politics. It's about history. It's about writing. It's a coming-of-age story, but not really coming of age. It's basically, in my opinion, the best way to describe it would be to say that it's a piece of life and a piece of youth and what it really means to be young. And it's a very complex book that goes in different directions, and even critics have, you know, tried to make something out of it for a long time, and you have so many different opinions and so many different directions. And I think that reading this book without knowing Flaubert, like his letters, his personal work, can just lead to have a very simple observation of the book. Whereas when you start to really know Flaubert, if you've read his personal works, his letters, and you know his, you know, biography and stuff, you get a different light on this book. So it is a book about, you know, a young man who falls in love with a married older woman, and nothing really ever happens between them, even though they both really want to, but at the same time they don't really want to, because if they did, it would turn into something else, and they want to preserve the purity and just the beauty of it all. And it's all intertwined in, you know, meeting people and having your illusions shattered in many different ways, and living in a society that's conflicted and going through so much change and lots of struggles, political, sociological, etc. It's very interesting, and the style is to die for. Flaubert just writes amazingly well. Like, every sentence is just a jewel, in my opinion. It's beautiful, honestly, so beautiful, and so moving. It's like really, really, really moving. In my opinion, it's so strong and dense and true. Like, it's very true, very, very, very true. And it's my favorite book. And I'm gonna make a video about Flaubert at some point because the man is just incredible. Fureur et Mystère by René Char. René Char is a poet, a French poet who was affiliated with the Surrealist movement in obviously the 20th century. This book, this collection of poetry, is a collection of poetry that were written for the most part when he was fighting against the Nazis in France during the Second World War. He was in the resistance and he had to die. I mean, not that he had to kill people, he had to see some of his friends die, he had to hide himself, he had to really do the war. So it's a very strong collection of poetry. It's beautiful. He has a very distinct style, in my opinion, where you can feel nature, you can feel the simplicity of life, but also just the violence of life as well. The surrealism is not super strong in this collection of poetry, so it's not too difficult to understand and get through. And the poems are very short. Some of them are in prose, which I do like. It's my favorite kind of poetry, actually. It's beautiful. It's actually really beautiful, and it's very different from most of the poetry I've read in my life, so I would highly recommend. And he has a lot of other collection of poetry which are beautiful too. I've read a few others, so he's a great author who does not get enough recognition, in my opinion, because I've never, really heard about him that much, even though I was studying literature. Then I have this one, which I don't really like, I have to say. Maybe it's because I don't get it enough, but for the moment I'm not a really big fan. It's by Federico Garcia Lorca, who is very well known, and it's called Complainte Gitanes. It's a collection of poetry as well. What can I say? They were written during 1924 and 1927, and it's a mixture of old legends, myths, stories, and current reflection on the political situation. It's kind of, some parts are beautiful and the parts I like the most were kind of surrealist. I mean, the style and the vibe I got of them. But I feel like those ones are kind of difficult to understand and to get through. Maybe because culture-wise, I'm not really big on Spain and Spanish history. Like, it's not I don't like it, but I just don't know much about it. So maybe it's a bit harder for me to just get into the book and get everything that he's trying to say. But yeah, I feel like this poetry is a bit more difficult to get into, in my opinion. But that's also because it's not necessarily what... that's not necessarily my cup of tea. And last but not least, by any means, Mahmoud Darwish. So I have talked about Mahmoud Darwish before when I was running my book club, which I hope I can run soon again in the future when I have more free time. We read Une mémoire pour l'oubli, memory for forgetfulness, I think it's translated in English. So he creates images that really appear in front of you because the writing and creative strength is so strong and important that you really get to feel. It's a very sensual poetry, like René Char, in my opinion. It's a very sensual poetry that speaks to your senses and really makes you have, I feel like, a very, very raw and sensual experience of reading the poetry. Not only that, but obviously the fact that Mahmoud Darwish is a Palestinian writer, so it's not to say that you have to approach it with thinking he's a Palestinian writer, but that's also something you can't deny, and that's something you can just ignore when you're reading it, because it's an important part. It's not the only part, but it's an important part of his identity and an important part of what he's writing about. So it's a beautiful poetry, it's beautiful piece of art, and it's also a beautiful piece of protestation against what's happening in Palestine, which is unacceptable. I don't know, it's probably with L'éducation sentimentale my favorite book of that's on the list for the exam. It's beautiful, like it's honestly so beautiful and so diverse as well. You have things that are a bit more traditional to Arabic literature, and you have things which are very modern. You have long poems, you have short poems, you have poems which are really like lyrical and almost very cliche in a positive way though, because they're beautiful. But you also have poems which are unlike most poems you've read before and leave you a bit confused. So I would definitely suggest reading them. To be honest, my favorite books are not this one or poetry by him. I really like his prose. I like prose more, I think. Most of the time I prefer prose, so maybe that's why. But I would highly, highly, highly recommend reading something by him, whether it's, you know, poetry or prose or anything. It's beautiful. And you also have documentaries online that are amazing if you are interested. So I'm getting really tired and my voice is like disappearing, so I'm gonna stop here because it's also a very long video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, guys, and I hope you understand why I'm so busy. Let me know what you've been reading lately, or let me know what, you know, or let me know which of those books you would like to read perhaps in the future, and I'll see you soon. Bye!